Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Marketing Chit Chat with Brandon Utley and Laura Greeno. Today we are talking about our biggest marketing mistakes. And Brandon's got some good stories about some of the well-known biggest mistakes. But we'll start with some of my own to help you learn and possibly avoid, right? I loved this quote. I actually just saw this today from Oscar Wilde. Experience is the name everyone gives to their mistakes. I thought that was really good. And then one of the things that I always tell people when I'm hiring is basically if you're not making mistakes as a digital marketer, you probably don't know what you're doing. I really do believe that because there's so many adjustments and changes and tweaks and things that happen in this industry are so fast. So you've got to be making testing, right? You could call it testing, but it's mistakes, right? You're going to make mistakes and you're going to learn from them and you're going to be so much better off for it. Just make small mistakes and quick, not big ones. So one of my biggest, I'll start off today, and one of my biggest mistakes that I made early on in my agency world, my own company, were starting off with small projects like I'll do a PPC campaign, or I'll do an SEO campaign, or I'll do a little social media campaign for a small business, a local small business that I was working with. And instead of enforcing them or making them do the research and planning phase, I'm like, oh, I've got a good idea about this. I think we can, you've got some good, a brand foundation. You know who you are and who you're going after. We'll just do a couple hours of setup and then we'll, get going. So each time, each one of these first kind of projects that I did, I ended up going back and saying, oh, this is not enough time. This is not enough time to do the research plan. And they don't have their foundation down. They don't know exactly who their customer is. They don't know exactly who they want to be in 5 years. They haven't done competitive analysis. They haven't put together a value proposition. All this foundational work around the brand, targeting especially, right? And needs to be done. And for me, that's an exceptional piece. Anybody can go do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, get a little results, right? But for me, my standards just were way too high. I needed exceptional work with exceptional results. I didn't want just what everybody else could get from anyone else. So those first few, I ended up doing the research and planning for free on my own time because I had agreed to it and didn't make them pay for it. And that was those were my biggest early mistakes that I stopped doing after those first three. And then I did say, I can't work with you unless we do this phase. It'll be so much better off, not just for this particular small project, but for any project you do going forward. That was a key one for me. Another one, so in the hiring and firing, so I always thought it was better to have someone doing something, a little something, right, than nothing. Even if they weren't that good or they didn't know what they were doing very well or couldn't take the training. They just couldn't learn well or fast enough. So me being too slow to hire and too slow to fire was also a really big mistake that I learned. So I thought a little was better than none, but I was wrong.
Yeah, I mean, they say hire slow, fire fast. Sometimes I don't know. I don't agree with fire fast. I kind of people have a chance, but fast is relative, right? You do want to make sure there's expectations going in. Like, this is what I expect, and if we have issues, there will be consequences potentially. and I'm not going to let it go on forever. Right. One of the good things I learned from an old boss years ago was their policy was you had a 90-day probationary period when you were hired. Everybody walking through the door, whether it was management or whomever, that gave them an out clause, if you will. Also, you and I work in a right to work state, so you can hire and fire at will kind of thing if you're a private company. But that pretty much set expectations to everybody. You've got 3 months to prove yourself and do what they're asking for, or you may not be here much longer than that, if at all, right? So at least that gave them that period of time to get to know you and help you orient to what their expectations were and stuff like that. So that's a great policy. Doesn't have to be 3 months. You could give somebody 3 weeks or whatever, and also say, we will have check-ins. And if you don't meet these criteria, and if we're going to part ways, just set that expectation real clear. So that's a good one.
Yeah. Goals, being very clear about the goals, what will be accomplished and what won't be accomplished. And if you can make it measurable, then the firing process is really like they know it's coming already. There's no surprise. You didn't hit what you were supposed to hit, right? This particular goal, this particular measurement, this particular KPI, whatever it ends up being. But yeah. And so then the firing is not really a firing. It's like it didn't work out.
Yeah.
It's not working. Right. So good. Yeah. All right. Another one that I thought about, right? So I thought it was about execution and results and doing everything right? I thought that was, but I was wrong. So when I had a perception matters, and I know this goes to the whole office politics thing that I really don't play inside of very well. So that's why I didn't think that perception of your leadership, mattered regardless of the results and execution of your team. So I had a really big, for us at the time, $10,000 advertising campaign going on a week that I was traveling. So I was out of the office. My team handled it perfectly with they knew exactly what they needed to do with. They executed well, they measured, they watched, they tweaked even during this week. But just the perception that here was our biggest ever campaign and I am out of the office. That mattered to my partners, to the other leadership. It did not matter to me because that's how I think and work, right? I've taught them exactly what they need to do, how they need to do it, what if scenarios, this happens or that happens, here's what you do next. And I was also available for, the phone calls, and okay, what do you want to do now? So, but the perception, me being gone, was a big mistake at the time that I wish I would have done differently. So those were a couple of my kind of big ones, big problems. But I also think another, just one quick other one was kind of like the red flags and the due diligence, right? On people, on companies, on clients, on hires, on all of that. So making sure that you do your due diligence, that you do make that phone call about that reference, about that person you're planning to partner with. Don't just take what you see in front of you and their work and results. Call somebody and talk. Those are my big ones. Brandon, what you got?
Oh my gosh, too many to count. A couple that come to mind, and sometimes what we're talking about is not the marketing mistake forward that the public sees, but what happens to you, the marketer. So you mentioned a couple of things that resonated with me. In the past, I've also been guilty of taking on work when people came to me and said, for example, hey, we really need a new website. And instead of saying, oh, wait, stop. Why do you need a website? Do you really need a new website? What's the real problem here? And having that conversation, I'm like, sure, I'll do a new website for you. Right. And then do the fancy new website. And then they're like disappointed because they're like, okay, now what? And you're like, what do you mean? You asked for a website, you got a website. And they're like, yeah, but what about the lead flow and the deal funnel and all this? I'm like, that's not what you asked. That's not what you asked for. You asked for what, you know what I mean? So it's like, I did them a disservice. They didn't really get what they actually needed. So I learned, like you, to take a pause and say, look, I know you're asking for a website. And then you find out the real reason is their main competitor just launched a new website or something stupid, right? And you're like, that's great. And then you can have that conversation. Look, we're looking at your website. Yes, it sucks out loud and you probably need to replace it, but we can do some tweaks in the interim. Or it's actually better than you think because you're too close to it. We can refine it a little bit, but the bigger issue is probably something else, right? And then you find out, oh yeah, they really don't have a funnel in it at all. They don't understand how to utilize it properly, and you can have that conversation. So that's a good one. Another, one I got burned on was from a marketer's perspective, marketing agency type, is committing to the work without getting paid, and having everything solidified up front. I did this one big project for a client years ago, and this is one of the only times I got burned. They agreed to pay half up front, but then the work was being done very fast, and so I did all this work, and then at the end of it, like that month or whatever, they were like, yeah, we weren't satisfied with the results. We're not paying you the rest, kind of thing. And I never got paid that last half. So that sucked. And it wasn't my fault. The company, actually, this is a hilarious story, not for me, but they basically set up this major online raffle kind of thing, if you will, sweepstakes. And, we're guaranteeing to give away a ton of money if somebody won this thing, which is virtually, by the way. But what they had to do in order to actually do the contest was take out this massive insurance policy. And so it ended up basically bankrupting the company because they were counting on all the buzz generated from this campaign to bring them a lot of new customers. And when people checked it out, they just wanted to enter the free contest. They really didn't care about signing up and being a paid customer for this stupid platform that the company was running. So it was really awful. So I got burned. The company had egg all over its face in the national media, et cetera. So that sucked. But I did want to take a couple minutes to just talk about some of the common marketing, what leads to many marketing mistakes. You talked about one of the first ones is the lack of research and testing. That's like number one, right? People just see, oh, ready, fire, aim. Like, oh, let's just go out there and start doing some pay-per-click ads or whatever it is without really thinking it through. Like, what's the strategy behind this first and foremost, and what's the results we're looking for and how we're going to measure it, et cetera. Right. That's a big one. Obviously, another one is lack of focus on the customer's needs, right? Only a handful of companies can get away with building something that they think people may want. And then, by virtue of reputation or whatever, people go, yeah, I got to have that. But otherwise, if you're making stuff just for you and you're not considering the customer's needs, that can be a big issue. One I think about is Apple. I mean, obviously, over the years, they've been really good at predicting what people would want, right? Up into including things like the iPhone. One of the best examples in our lifetime, right? However, a lot of people don't realize years before that, they were toying around with touch devices, and they had another touch type of a device back in the late 90s or something. It was a complete flop. I think it was the Apple Newton. And I remember a couple geeks that bought those, and they were expensive and they didn't work well, et cetera. And they had to kill it, right? But they weren't really in tune with what customers needed and wanted up to that point. And it took a while for them to be able to, refine the technology, et cetera, until they could produce something that somebody would actually want or need. That leads to another huge mistake that causes a lot of bad issues is corporate pride or arrogance. And I'm going to give a couple of examples real quick where companies just think we're so big, we've been around, we're awesome, whatever we make, everybody will buy it and love it, right? A couple of examples that I read about. One was if you're old enough, you may remember VHS tapes, right? Before DVDs, now everything streams. But back in the day, Sony made a thing called Betamax, and it was like a better version of a videotape that you could use to tape television programs or watch videos. They were slightly better than JVC's VHS format, right? But they didn't really do their testing. And so they just thought, we're Sony, we're making a better product. We think people will pay more for better quality, but the Betamaxes didn't even hold as much storage capacity as the VHS. Long story short, Sony got their ass handed to them and the Betamax was a total flop, right? Another favorite, this is hysterical. I didn't even know this until today, but Ford at one point had this car called the Pinto. And on the road now, they're these teeny little cars. They're kind of ugly looking. And this was back in, I guess, the 70s or whatever. But when they introduced this car in Portuguese, they didn't realize that the word Pinto means tiny penis in Portuguese. Okay. So that car was a big flop. Not only that, it had a bad reputation of getting in. If you got in a rear end collision, the car would explode. And so there was a memo that got leaked where a Ford exec said it would be cheaper to repair the cars to the injured drivers than it would be to recall the vehicles. And of course, once that hit, people were like, you got to be kidding me. So that was a horrible example. And then others, people may have heard of, New Coke. Back in the mid 80s, Coca-Cola decided to change their format up. And people had been drinking this stuff since the 1800s or whatever. That's what Coke tasted like. They hated the new Coke, and within a matter of months, they had to pull it, and it was multi-million dollars, flop. So not listening to the customer, right?
Yeah, that one specifically, the Coke New Coke.
Yeah,
I read more deeply into that, and it was really a marketing research setup error.
Wow.
Setup. So apparently, when you take sips, right? So the Pepsi challenge is what made this happen. So when you took sips of Pepsi versus regular Coke, people selected Pepsi. The number was.
I think it was sweeter. Yeah. And so based on this limited test, they were like, "Shit, we need to change our sugar formula."
Yep, which was wrong.
Really bad.
Yeah, people the real test should have been an entire Coke. When you drink an entire Coke, people preferred Coke over Pepsi.
Correct.
So, total market research problem.
Yep, and a couple of other things that lead to the marketing mistakes. We just touched on one is ignorance or insensitivity, like the Ford Pinto. Another one that I thought was true was also an automobile, which was the Chevy Nova. There's this what do you call it? Meme that's been going around for years that car in Spanish, Nova means no go. So I had always heard the story that car was also a huge flop in Latin American countries. Apparently that was an urban legend. It did sell well. And there were reasons why they kept that name because it didn't really have that impact in certain countries. Nevertheless, again, if you were making a car or anything else in a country, you would want to check the language and see if it's going to translate right before you introduce the Ford Pinto or whatever it is, right? And that also leads to the next mistake, which is moving too fast. Speed kills, right? If you're unfortunately, a lot of marketers trying to jump on what's happening right now, urgency, but sometimes that really is impacted by stuff that can be perceived as real stupid right after the fact, right? And there's an example I saw of like Kenneth Cole years back when they tweeted something out about that was very culturally insensitive, and they mentioned an uproar that was happening in Cairo with the hashtag, and then pivoted to like, we've heard this, there's an uproar in Cairo. Rumor is they heard about our new spring collection, and here, go check it out. And everybody was like, F you, like that is so culturally insensitive. And not only that, it was tweeted by the CEO of the company at the time. And so that's ridiculous. And so they got all kind of negative feedback from that. But again, cultural insensitivity, moving too fast, not thinking about the, possible repercussions. Another one on the flip side of that is when people just set it and forget it. And there's been numerous examples through the years of people like setting up social media posts, for example, that go out and something happens like 9/11, and all of a sudden all your tweets that day are totally off the mark, totally insensitive. And unless somebody pushing the stop button quickly, abort, like you're gonna look stupid. So you can't really set it and forget it. You got to be ready at a moment's notice to pivot and see what's happening in real time.
Definitely. Okay. Thank you. Very good information. Thank you for joining us. I think we had Jared, Michael, another Michael, David, Noel, So nice to see everyone. We'll see you next time, Wednesdays, 11 a.m. Eastern. Next time we're talking about how to be more creative.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
See ya.